Kitty Kiernan arrived in London on or around October 26, 1921. We do not know how long she stayed, but there is no record of correspondence between her and Collins until he wrote to her on November 8th. At that point, it seems that he had just arrived in London again, having been with Kiernan in Ireland. As November 8th was a Tuesday, and Collins referred to having spent the weekend in the fresh air of Ireland, it is likely that he crossed to Ireland after he and Griffith met Birkenhead on November 3rd. Thus it is likely that Collins returned to Ireland with Kiernan approximately 1 week after she had arrived in Britain. For Collins, that week was an eventful one. On October 27th, the British advanced a memo stating that in order for negotiations to proceed, the Irish needed to definitively state 1. They were willing to bear allegiance to the Crown as a nation of the Commonwealth. 2. Common citizenship was not compatible with neutrality. If Ireland availed of Commonwealth membership, that had to come with responsibilities. 3. Facilities for common defence of the British Isles must be offered to the British military. 4. No tariffs or inhibitors to free trade would be imposed by either side. 5. The Irish would have to be willing to accept the ruling of an independent arbitrator on war, debt and pensions. That evening, Collins and Griffith met with Birkenhead and Lloyd George to discuss the memo. The following day, the Irish delegation advanced a memo of its own. They asked that the British keep its content strictly private, as they wished that it not be known in Ireland. The memo 1 accepted that the common defence of the Isles would require British facilities on the Irish coast. 2. They also agreed that they would accept the King as head of state of the signatory nations, subject to the unimpaired unity of Ireland. Lloyd George was anxious to give news of the shape of a settlement in Parliament. His fragile coalition was under political pressure. Thomas Jones met Duggan and sounded him out about a letter of assurance. Duggan said that it would be hard to give anything in writing, but offered to arrange a private meeting with Griffith and Collins. Their subsequent correspondence revealed that Collins and Kiernan spent most of these evenings together. Although their correspondence doesn't mention the politics of the day, Collins was bound by professional secrecy and discretion. It is hard to imagine that they didn't discuss the events of his day. It was equally hard to imagine that the woman he intended to marry had no influence on his political thought process. Alas, we can only speculate as to the extent of that influence. But Collins seemed to be in good spirits. On Sunday, October 30th, he and Churchill struck up a cordial relationship in the latter's home, as they laughed at the prices that had reportedly been placed on their heads, in Collins's case during the war in Ireland, and in Churchill's during the Boer War. Upstairs, Griffith was involved in more serious negotiations with Lloyd George. During their meeting, the two men drafted a letter stating that Ireland would accept the King as head of the Associated Free States of the Commonwealth on condition of unity. The letter also agreed that the partitioned area's boundary was yet to be decided, and that a Dublin Parliament would not remove powers already vested by the British in Belfast. Griffith also committed to Dublin's protection of Ulster's industrial interests. The letter was an attempt to demonstrate progress on Lloyd George's part, thereby eliminating any potential heaves against his premiership from the Unionist wing of his coalition. Nonetheless, it caused a ferocious row among the Irish delegates when Griffith showed it to them on November 1st. Duffy, Barton and Childers opposed the reference to the King, and Griffith stared them down during a heated argument. Collins said little during this row, but the stress may have been telling on him. That night, he, Liam Tobin, Tom Cullen, Emmett Dalton, Joe Guilfoyle and Joe Dolan showed up at a dinner party in Hans Place. They were in high spirits, and soon their playfulness turned into a food fight. Kathleen McKenna later recalled it as the big fella letting off steam. They were a happy, boisterous group who preferred horseplay to formalities, she added. There was no mention of Kiernan being present when the big fella let off his steam, but there is some evidence to suggest that she may have been concerned about his overindulgence in alcohol. Having returned from London and spent a subsequent weekend with Collins, he returned to London, and on November 10th she wrote from Granard. Her letter outlines her concerns for Collins's welfare and their shared potential to overindulge in alcohol. as well as acknowledging their engagement and articulating a foreboding sense that Boland's prayers for a future with her were making her unhappy.
My dear sweetheart, I've just finished my tea and I'm so happy and peaceful here all alone. And it's only about 2 hours since I wrote you before. But still, if it gives me pleasure and at the same time gives you the same pleasure, well then, it's all right. You see, I've invested a new copybook or pad since last weekend. Felt a strong inclination to write you long letters, so this is the proper and only paper I thought. It is so big. Did you notice it was new? Tell me, and it happens to be like yours. But that's only an accident, so don't be thinking, as we used to say at school, I'm trying to copy you. And don't be thinking I'm a bit mad, as you say sometimes, but perhaps you're meant madly in love. This didn't strike me before. Anyway, I do write you nice letters, do I? Are they? Don't be silly ones. But there is more love in them than yours. But I read in the Tatler, men who don't love you always write beautiful letters. Vi is also away in Dublin. I'm going out now to visit her papa and mother, who are leaving bank shortly. I'm in great form and hope I can continue so. I'm not going to worry or cry anymore, but just make my life as happy as possible and be real happy. And if only H and his friends would stop storming heaven with his prayers, I wouldn't be getting unhappy with such mixed and peculiar feelings. Something tells me that there is something like that happening, and that's why I get ideas and feelings I never got. When he and his friends know, they'll have to stop and pray for you and me, if they're so fond of me. You may think me silly, perhaps I am. But there is some queer pressure, and it's not Harry's letter, but something strange. I do wish we were married, as I'm really fond of you. What a funny letter this is, but I always like to try and tell you exactly how I feel. I wish you were here. I've such a contented feeling when you were near. The feeling we were together, nothing can separate us, and that we understand each other in everything. And if we two agree, we can console each other at once and be happy. And then I never want you to leave me. I never get tired of you. But I'm always afraid I tire you with talk. Wish I could be silent, Kate. Would you love me more? Goodbye. And just take a big hug and a kiss and all the nice things that happen when we meet in a crowd. The same as if I was there when you read this. Yours, Kate. Shall write tomorrow, DV. Have you been to Cadogan Hotel since? What do you do with yourself at night? At the hours you spend with me? Any good shows? So very glad you had a nice run back to town and enjoyed a weekend and slept in train and were not ill and that you feel so well. Don't work too hard and don't drink too much. You don't mind me saying this, do you? I know that you don't drink so much. Just that one gets so fond of it, like me. Excuse pencil.
On the morning after Collins's letting off steam at Hans Place, Griffith had another row with Duffy, Barton, Childers, and even the civil servant John Deshart. This time they succeeded in getting him to change the form of words on the king. Collins again said very little during this tense encounter. Griffith and Collins took the letter to Birkenhead in the Lords. They later discussed it with Chamberlain, Birkenhead, and Lloyd George in Downing Street. At the end of these sessions, the letter Griffith signed stated that he would recommend a free partnership with the other states associated with the British Commonwealth, the formula defining the partnership to be arrived at in later discussion. I was on the same condition prepared to recommend that Ireland should assent to a recognition of the Crown as head of the proposed Association of the Free States. This is slightly different to the initial recognition of the King as head of the Associated Free States, which might be read to recognise the King as head of each individual state. It still depended on essential unity, and was still consistent with Dev's external association idea. After Collins had concluded these negotiations, he and Kiernan returned to Ireland.